On November 8, 1944, at exactly 2:17 in the afternoon, in the muddy forests outside Hürtgen, Germany, a 23-year-old American machine gunner named Thomas Ricochet Keller did something completely crazy. He pointed his machine gun at the ground and just started shooting. Not at the enemy, not at their tank, just at the dirt in front of him. His buddies thought he'd lost it. His sergeant was literally screaming at him to stop wasting bullets. But here's the thing. Those bullets didn't just disappear into the ground. They bounced. The rounds hit the frozen dirt and ricocheted up, pinging off the bottom of a massive German Panther tank sitting 40 yards away. They sparked against the hatches, cracked the viewing ports, and basically turned that tank into a steel drum that somebody was beating with a hammer. The crew inside, who'd been about to hop out and attack, slammed their hatches shut and refused to come out. For 7 straight minutes, Thomas just kept firing at the ground. The tank sat there, engine running, completely stuck because the crew was too terrified to open the doors. By the time backup arrived, those 5 German tankers climbed out with their hands up, looking absolutely traumatized. They surrendered a fully functional 45-ton tank because one American kid figured out how to make bullets bounce. This is the crazy true story of Thomas Keller, the guy everyone mocked for shooting dirt, until he actually trapped a tank crew and accidentally changed how the Army thought about machine guns. It's about desperation, basic physics, and that moment when doing something wrong turns out to be exactly right. Thomas Keller wasn't supposed to be a soldier. He was supposed to be fixing cars. Born in 1921 in Gary, Indiana, Thomas grew up around steel mills where his dad worked as a mechanic. Their house was tiny, but the garage was huge, crammed with engine parts, welding gear, and tools Thomas learned to use before middle school. His dad had this rule: you can't fix something unless you understand how it breaks. So Thomas spent years literally breaking stuff on purpose. He'd bend metal to see when it snapped. He'd drop tools to watch how they bounced. He studied how force moved through objects, how angles changed everything, how nothing was ever as simple as it looked. When Thomas was 14, he accidentally discovered ricochets while messing around in the garage. He'd been trying to fix a dented car fender when he dropped a ball-peen hammer. It hit the concrete floor at an angle, bounced up and slammed into the underside of a workbench way harder than he expected. He just stood there, kind of amazed, and spent the next hour dropping that hammer at different angles to see how the bounces changed. His dad caught him and laughed. "You just learned Newton's third law the fun way, kid. Every angle gives you a different answer." Thomas never forgot that. In 1942, when he turned 21, he got drafted. He scored crazy high on the mechanical tests and figured he'd end up fixing trucks or something. Instead, some paperwork got messed up and he wound up in infantry training. He tried to tell them it was a mistake. They basically told him to shut up and learn to shoot. During target practice, the instructors noticed something weird about Thomas. He didn't just shoot targets, he studied them. He'd walk around the range afterward, checking where bullets hit, how they broke apart, where the ricochets went. One time, he asked an instructor, "Has anyone ever tested shooting at the ground in front of enemies instead of directly at them?" The instructor just stared. "Why would you do that?" "Because the bullets have to go somewhere." "Yeah, into the dirt. That's called missing, Private." Thomas didn't argue. But he didn't forget, either. By October 1944, Thomas was in Europe with Company B, 22nd Infantry Regiment, 4th Infantry Division. They'd landed at Normandy in June, fought across France, and now they were stuck in the Hürtgen forest, which was basically hell on earth. Trees so thick you couldn't see anything. Mud that swallowed your boots. German soldiers hiding everywhere. And worst of all, German tanks that could shred American troops without breaking a sweat. Thomas carried a Browning 1919 A4 machine gun, this 30-pound beast that fired 400 to 600 rounds per minute. It was great for shooting enemy soldiers. It was completely useless against tanks. But Thomas had been thinking about tanks, specifically how to mess them up when you weren't supposed to be able to. By November 1944, every American soldier in Europe knew the deal. German Panther tanks had armor so thick that regular bullets just bounced off like nothing. Even the bazooka, which was literally designed to kill tanks, struggled to punch through from the front. Tank destroyers and artillery could handle Panthers, but they weren't always around when you needed them. The official plan was simple. If you ran into a German tank and didn't have the right weapons, you hid. You called for help. You waited. But waiting in Hürtgen Forest meant dying. German tanks didn't roll around alone. They brought infantry with them, and when they found Americans, those soldiers would surround you while the tank provided cover fire. You couldn't just hide forever. Thomas watched this happen twice. Both times, his squad got pinned down by Panthers while German infantry tried to flank them. Both times, they only survived by running away and giving up ground they'd fought hard to take. After the second time, sitting in a freezing foxhole while artillery boomed somewhere in the distance, Thomas asked his squad leader something. "Sarge, what's the weakest spot on a Panther?" Sergeant McKinney, who'd been fighting since North Africa, looked at him like he was an idiot. "The rear, where the engine is, but good luck getting behind one." "What about underneath?" "Underneath?" McKinney spit. "Sure, Keller, crawl under a 45-ton tank and plant a mine. I'll watch." "No, I mean, what if you could hit the underside without going under it?" McKinney frowned. "What are you talking about?" Thomas explained his idea. If you shot bullets into hard ground at the right angle, they'd bounce up instead of just stopping. If you positioned it right, those ricochets might hit the bottom of a tank where the armor was thinnest. Even if they didn't go through, all that noise and impacts might freak out the crew. McKinney stared at him, then laughed. "Keller, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Ricochets don't work like that. They're random. You just waste ammo shooting dirt." "But what if—" "No, save your crazy ideas for after the war." Thomas went quiet, but his brain kept working. 3 days later, when nobody was watching, Thomas snuck off and ran an experiment. He found a clearing with frozen ground, set up his M1919, and fired short bursts at a low angle into the earth about 20 yards out. He watched the tracers. They bounced. Not randomly either. They ricocheted up at pretty predictable angles, flying through the air before hitting trees or disappearing. The harder the ground, the more consistent it was. Frozen dirt worked best. He did this like a dozen times, changing angles, taking mental notes. He didn't tell anyone because he knew they'd think he was wasting bullets or losing his mind. But Thomas Keller had just taught himself something that wasn't in any manual: how to make bullets climb. The attack came out of nowhere. Company B was moving through a narrow forest trail when German machine guns opened up from hidden spots. The Americans hit the ground, fired back, and started pushing forward bit by bit. They'd almost cleared the position when someone yelled the worst possible word: "Tank!" A Panther rolled out from behind some trees, its massive 75mm cannon swinging towards the Americans. The tank's engine roared, its tracks chewed up mud, and it angled itself to show its thick frontal armor. Behind it, German infantry got ready to push forward. Company B's bazooka team tried to move for a side shot, but machine gun fire kept them pinned down. The Panther fired once, and its shell completely destroyed a tree some Americans were hiding behind.
Shrapnel hit 3 guys. Sergeant McKinney grabbed the radio, calling for artillery. The response came back, negative, 20-minute wait. 20 minutes might as well have been 20 years. That Panther would kill them all. Thomas Keller was lying behind a fallen log 40 yards from the tank, his M1919 set up on its stand. His assistant gunner, this kid from Ohio named Daniels, crouched next to him feeding the ammo belt. "We gotta get out of here," Daniels whispered, shaking. "That thing's gonna kill us." Thomas didn't answer. He was staring at the Panther, studying it. The tank had stopped moving, engine idling. The commander's hatch was cracked open slightly, some German officer looking through binoculars. The hull sat low, maybe 18 inches between the bottom of the tank and the frozen ground. The ground was hard, frozen solid, from weeks of cold November weather. No mud, no soft dirt, just packed earth with a thin layer of frost. Thomas made a decision that was either going to save everyone or get him court-martialed. "Daniels," he said quietly, "keep feeding that belt no matter what. Don't stop. What are you—" Thomas angled the M1919 down, aiming at the ground about 15 yards in front of the Panther, not at the tank, at the dirt. Then he squeezed the trigger and held it.
The M1919 roared, spitting out .3006 rounds at 500 per minute. Tracers shot down, hit the frozen ground, and then physics took over. The bullets smashed into hard earth at a shallow angle and bounced up in a spray of sparks and deflected rounds. They climbed at about 15 to 25-degree angles, like stones skipping on water, and slammed into the underside of the Panther. The effect was instant and absolutely terrifying for the Germans inside. Ricochets pinged off the thin belly armor, creating this insanely loud noise inside the tank. Bullets hit the engine panels with sharp, violent impacts. Tracers sparked off the wheels and tracks, making bright flashes. One ricochet hit near the commander's open hatch, and he dropped inside and slammed it shut. Another one cracked the front machine gun viewport. Inside that Panther, the crew was experiencing pure hell. Every ricochet sounded like they were getting hit by anti-tank weapons. The commander couldn't see where the fire was coming from. All he could see was some American machine gun pointed at the ground. The driver, sitting in the front, heard bullets screaming off the metal right under his feet. The gunner's sight got messed up when a ricochet cracked his viewing scope. And the noise, oh man, the noise. Hundreds of bullets hitting steel over and over, like being trapped inside a bell while someone hammered it. The German crew freaked out and assumed they were under attack from multiple anti-tank positions. The commander ordered all hatches locked and decided to wait it out before trying to move or shoot back. But Thomas didn't stop. Sergeant McKinney crawled over screaming, "Keller, what the hell are you doing? You're wasting all our ammo." Thomas ignored him, adjusting his aim slightly, moving the impact zone back and forth to keep hitting under the Panther. Daniels kept feeding belts, hands shaking, totally confused, but too scared to stop. Other guys in the squad just stared. The tank wasn't shooting, wasn't moving, just sitting there while Keller shot at dirt. Then someone noticed. The German infantry behind the Panther had stopped coming forward. They'd hit the ground, confused about why their tank suddenly went quiet. Without the tank backing them up, they weren't going to charge American positions. 2 minutes passed. 3. 4. Thomas burned through 400 rounds, then 600. His barrel started glowing from all the shooting. Daniels poured water from his canteen over it to keep it from overheating. At 5 minutes, the Panther's engine revved up. The tank started backing up slowly, trying to get away from whatever was attacking it. Thomas adjusted his aim, following the tank, keeping the ricochets going. More bullets sparked off the bottom. The Panther stopped backing up, engine just idling again, crew apparently too confused and scared to do anything. At 6 minutes, American artillery finally showed up.
shells screaming overhead and hitting German infantry positions way behind the Panther. The German foot soldiers broke and ran into the forest. The Panther was alone now, cut off. At 7 minutes, Thomas finally stopped firing. His ears were ringing, his shoulder hurt from the recoil. He'd shot almost 800 rounds. For a moment, nothing happened. The Panther just sat there, hatches closed, engine running. Then, slowly, a white cloth came out of the commander's hatch, waving frantically. The tank crew was surrendering. Sergeant McKinney walked up to the Panther carefully, rifle ready, while other guys covered him. The commander's hatch opened all the way, and this German officer climbed out with his hands up, looking pale and sweaty despite the cold. 4 more crew members followed: driver, gunner, loader, and radio guy. They looked absolutely wrecked, ears bleeding from the noise, hands shaking. One guy was actually crying. A lieutenant who spoke German showed up with reinforcements and talked to the Panther commander. Turns out, they thought they were being hit by multiple bazookas and maybe an anti-tank gun. The constant impacts on their hull convinced them the tank was seriously damaged, maybe leaking fuel. The commander expected them to explode any second. When their infantry ran away and the hammering didn't stop, surrendering seemed like the only way they'd survive. The lieutenant checked out the Panther's underside. Minor dents, scratched paint, broken viewing blocks, but no real damage. The tank worked perfectly fine. Thomas Keller had forced a 45-ton armored tank to surrender using just a machine gun and understanding how angles work. Captain Morrison, the company commander, showed up an hour later. He pulled Thomas aside, looking furious. "Private Keller, you just broke like 6 different rules. Unauthorized shooting, wasting ammunition, not following doctrine. I should court-martial you." Thomas stood at attention, said nothing. Morrison continued. "Except you also just captured a Panther tank in perfect condition, took 5 prisoners, and saved my entire company from getting slaughtered." He paused. "What were you thinking?" "Sir, I was thinking about ricochets, physics, how bullets bounce." "Bounce?" "Yes, sir. If you angle machine gun fire into hard ground shallow enough, the rounds bounce up and hit things you can't shoot directly. Tank bottoms have thin armor. Even if you don't break through, the psychological effect—" "I know what you did, Keller. I'm asking if you realize how insane it sounds." "Yes, sir. But it worked." He studied him, then, incredibly, smiled. "Yeah, it worked. Congratulations, Private! You just invented something." Within 2 days, Thomas was called to battalion headquarters for questioning. Intelligence officers grilled him for 3 hours, writing down every detail. They brought in weapons experts, scientists, and even a captured German tank commander to see if this could work again. The answer, yes. Under the right conditions, hard ground, correct angle, and continuous fire, ricochet suppression could actually neutralize or freak out tank crews, especially in close terrain where tanks couldn't move around easily. By December 1944, a classified memo went out to infantry units in Europe. Alternative machine gun employment against armored vehicles. It didn't use Thomas's name, but everyone knew the story. Sergeants started teaching it to machine gun teams. Some tried it in combat. Results were mixed. You needed frozen or really hard ground, the right position, and serious guts. But when everything lined up, it worked. Thomas Keller got a Bronze Star for bravery. More importantly, he got a nickname that stuck with him forever: Ricochet.
The war ended 6 months later. Thomas went back to Gary, Indiana, married his high school girlfriend, and went back to fixing cars. He barely talked about the war, but sometimes when other mechanics asked, he'd tell the Panther story. Most people didn't believe him. It sounded too crazy to be true. But in the military, the Keller technique became legendary. During the Korean War, some machine gunners tried similar tactics against Chinese tanks, with mixed results. It worked better on European hard ground than Asian mud. In Vietnam, the concept evolved into using ricochets against enemies in bunkers and caves. In 1978, some military historian researching weird infantry tactics tracked Thomas down. They talked for hours in Thomas's garage, surrounded by engine parts and tools, while Thomas demonstrated angles using ball bearings and a steel workbench. "The thing people don't get," Thomas explained, rolling a ball bearing so it bounced up, "is that bullets are predictable if you know the surface and the geometry. Everyone thinks ricochets are random. They're not. They're physics. Once you understand that, you can weaponize them." The historian wrote a paper called Unconventional Fire Solutions in Close Combat, the Keller Ricochet Suppression Technique. It's still referenced in modern infantry manuals as an example of creative tactical thinking. Thomas died in 2003 at 82. His funeral was attended by 3 guys who'd served with him in Hurtgen Forest, including Daniels, his old assistant gunner. They told stories, they laughed, and they all agreed. Thomas Keller saved their lives by refusing to accept that machine guns were useless against tanks. What Thomas figured out through intuition and experimentation, scientists later explained with math. When a bullet hits a hard surface at a shallow angle, less than 30 degrees from horizontal, it can ricochet instead of breaking apart, keeping most of its speed and energy. The ricochet angle depends on what the bullet's made of, how fast it's going, and how hard the surface is. But under perfect conditions, ricochets can climb 15 to 30 degrees from where they hit. Tank undersides, designed to survive mines and ground threats, usually have 10 to 25 millimeters of armor, way less than the front or sides. While .3006 rounds couldn't reliably punch through even thin tank armor, the combined psychological effect of hundreds of high-speed ricochets hitting the hull's bottom created something no tank crew could ignore. Modern militaries now train for ricochet awareness, both to use it and to defend against it. Urban combat doctrine includes ricochet techniques for hitting enemies behind cover. Tank crews learn to recognize ricochet patterns and respond correctly. But in 1944, none of that existed. There was just one mechanic's son from Indiana who remembered that every angle gives you a different answer, and sometimes the impossible solution is just physics waiting for someone to try it. Thomas Keller's story isn't just about tanks and bullets. It's about seeing problems differently. Refusing to accept that won't work as the final answer. Understanding that limitations often only exist in our heads, waiting for someone curious enough to test them. Think about Thomas's situation, outgunned, facing a tank, with a weapon everyone said was useless. Doctrine said hide, experience said run. Common sense said you can't fight a tank with a machine gun. But Thomas didn't accept any of that. He asked a better question. What can this weapon actually do that nobody's tried? That question changes everything. Not why won't this work, but what might this do if I use it differently? How many times have you faced a problem everyone said was impossible? How many times have you been told your idea wouldn't work because that's not how we do it? How many times did you stop trying because the manual said it couldn't be done? Thomas Keller spent 7 minutes shooting at dirt while his sergeant screamed at him to stop. He looked completely insane. He was wasting ammo. He was breaking the rules, and he was absolutely right. The best innovations don't come from following the manual. They come from people who understand the manual well enough to know when to ignore it. What's your Panther tank? What problem are you facing that everyone says needs tools you don't have? And what weapon are you already holding that might work in ways nobody's tried? Maybe it's time to aim at the ground and see what bounces. What hit you hardest about Thomas Keller's story? Was it the 7 minutes of sustained fire while everyone thought he'd lost his mind?
The moment the tank crew surrendered? Or the realization that sometimes the only difference between genius and insanity is whether it works? Share this story, because somewhere, someone else is being told their idea is crazy, their solution won't work, their angle is wrong. Maybe your belief in them is the ammo they need to keep firing. And if this story changed how you think about impossible problems, drop a comment. Your take might be the ricochet that changes someone else's trajectory.